It's time with JMU Hall of Famer and someone who knows a hell of a lot about taking it to the house.
Joyce breaks a tackle and goes in for a touchdown. Another spectacular run by Delvin Joyce.
Delvin Joyce brings his unique perspective to the podcast to break down all things he's seeing about JMU football, with a little help from EPA King Jack Fitzpatrick and Bennett Conlon.
Here he goes. He's going to try to beat the punter. He does. He's gone. And that is a touchdown.
Welcome into To the House.
Look at him turn back and forth. Oh, he broke his ankles. Now he's got an entourage. And he's got a touchdown.
Now, here's Delvin Joyce with Jack Fitzpatrick and Bennett Conlon.
What's going on, JMU Nation? It is your host, Delvin Joyce, with another episode of To the House. I am joined, as always, by my guy, Jack Fitzpatrick, a.k.a. Jay Feezy, a.k.a. the EPA King. And I can't wait to hear some of these EPA stats today, Jack. What's going on, my guy?
Yo, this team's unconscious. The JMU's offense figured something out, and all of a sudden, I think I saw a stat from PFT, the Barstool guy. JMU's the first team to score 60 points or more in back-to-back weeks since the 2019 LSU team.
Get out of here. So PFT, I think it's PFT commenter, right? I'm not really in the zeitgeist of, college sports, but I know he's a JMU guy, right? So
he is a JMU guy. So he's repping the brand hard right now.
Man, shout out to that dude, man. I love that. I didn't really get on my radar until the last game day. And I was like, yo, who is this dude, man? He's all about JMU and he's got like this cult following. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cult. That's a great way to describe his fans. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slots games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. BetOnline, the game starts here. Check out the JMU Sports News Podcast with Bennett and Jack. New episodes drop in the middle of every single week, previewing the upcoming week and recapping the previous week. It's all part of the JMU Sports News Network, your home for To the House and the JMU Sports News Podcast.
Well, hey, listen, let's get right into it. I love the fact that this is titled Ball State Beatdown, because as you saw, Jack, this was a Ball State beatdown. This was an absolute demolishment of this MAC program. And, obviously the big concern coming into this week was a JMU letdown. And so after the big win over UNC, where everybody's getting all these national awards, they're getting all this national attention, and you got 18, 19, and 20-year-olds getting patted on the back, with everyone on campus saying, you guys are the greatest thing since sliced bread. And for this team to come out and perform the way they did, I think was not only a credit to the team itself, but also a credit to Coach Bob Chesney and the entire coaching staff. Now, I think what we wanted to see was a continuation of last week. And I think we saw that, but we only really wanted to see it on one side of the ball because, as we talked about on last week's episode, Jack, UNC did score 50 points. And so, again, that what we saw was an absolute demolishment. And other than the fact that we finally beat a team from a state other than North Carolina, I think what was also pretty cool about this is that we have a common opponent with a top 10 team, Miami, and we scored more points against this team than did Miami. So, Jack, has that dawned on you yet that the Hurricanes only scored 62 points and we scored 63?
I didn't even think of that. That's a great part. Maybe the offense, if JMU and Miami faced off tomorrow, that might be a 50-55 type of game of just offensive fireworks. But you hit the nail on the head. We wanted to see the offense keep performing at a high level. They did. And then the defense allows just 7 points. They have a few interceptions. Terrence Spence picks up right where he left off. Eric O'Neal has a pick six, a defensive end who's really coming into his own now and may finish this year as one of the top, edge rushers in the Sun Belt. Defense played a lights out ball game for 60 minutes.
Lights out ball game. And what was really cool about this is that for me, as someone who played in the very first matchup between James Madison and Ball State, yes, I am aging myself right now because I was a redshirt freshman the year that we went to Muncie, Indiana and played FBS Ball State. And I distinctly remember walking into that stadium and saying, holy cow, we're going to get to play some big time college football today. And how the tides have turned. Because now Ball State comes into our house. They are a 20-point underdog, and we've got a sold-out 26,000 people at the Mullet at Bridgeport Stadium, and we absolutely beat them down. So it was interesting to see sort of the juxtaposition of where the two programs have gone over the last 30 years. And I think for us, a lot of us have to sort of put some trust in Coach Bob Chesney. Because one of the things that I could always trust with Kurt Cignetti in prior years is that, he's going to have the team ready to play and they're going to have a great game plan. And we didn't necessarily see that with the way the team opened up at Charlotte.
Yeah.
We didn't necessarily feel that with the way they played against Gardner-Webb. But when you look at Chapel Hill and now you add this, I think, signature Bridgeforth win to that resume, it really feels like Bob Chesney's got this team rolling. So, Jack, I mean, what are your thoughts on the way the team actually came out and how they looked in terms of being ready to play in that game?
I mean, they looked phenomenal. What a juxtaposition to what it was against Gardner-Webb. When you put those two games next to each other and you're going to say, well, if you had told me at the end of that Gardner-Webb game, the next time they step into Bridgeport, they're going to hang 63 up on a team, on an FBS team, when they couldn't even score 14 against an FCS team, like just an insane performance. Alonzo Barnett, I was joking when I said this after the UNC game where I was like, what if he continues having, 300 plus yards and a few touchdowns? Could he potentially be like on the outside looking in for the Heisman? Well, now he had 7 touchdowns, a week ago. He now had, was it 6 in total?
Totally. Yeah, it's insane. And if you don't believe, I mean, listen, if you don't honestly believe that this guy is a Heisman candidate, if he can keep up this pace, he should absolutely be a Heisman candidate. He has 0 chance of winning, right? Because obviously the powers that be will not allow that to happen. We're going to talk about that at the end, when I take it to the house. But he should absolutely be in New York City at the ceremony, as a finalist. If not just receiving some votes. But Barnett, you're right. He picked up exactly where he left off. And I think, Jack, what's interesting is that we have to admit that the first throw of every game from Barnett is going to be a dud.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad he shakes it off now because wow. It's every pass. It's just going to be errant.
Yeah, that first pass. But listen, after that first pass, and maybe you want to chalk it up to like the first couple of passes, honestly, if we're being honest. But after that, the guy goes into the kitchen and he starts cooking. And I think what was good about the game plan this week on offense is that it was a very simple game plan. They just executed it to perfection. The passing game was not real complicated. There were no complicated route schemes. There were no double moves. I didn't see any trick plays. There were no reverses, no flea flickers. It was just our guy beating the other guy on the Ball State team man to man. And so what's cool is that for the second straight week, we had 8 players on offense who caught a pass, same as last week. And I think all credit is due to a lot of that intermediate passing game. So shout out to Coach Kennedy with that intermediate passing game, because Barnett averaged 10 yards a pass. We had 29 first downs. And here's the real kicker. Here's the key. If we can keep this up going through the rest of the season, we were 90% conversion on third downs, 90%. And that was a big place where we needed to improve. And I think, again, that can be attributed to the fact that we have a very simple passing game, and Barnett improved on throwing some of those short passes and some of those intermediate balls. we know the guy has like NFL arm talent when throwing the ball downfield. But it was some of those shorter passes where, maybe they were coming out a little hot and we weren't necessarily executing on those. And now what you see in this past week, he executed those passes and we were 90% conversion on third down. So, Jack, did you see any improvement from AB3 on some of those short passes? And how did you see that translate into the offense staying on the field and keeping drives alive?
I mean, Ryan Hansen didn't have to be used, so shout out to that. Their offense was clicking, was rolling. I just rewatched the game because I wasn't able to watch it on Saturday, so it's fresh in my mind. I sat down, was watching the Commanders do the beatdown to the Cardinals earlier today. We're recording on a Sunday while I was watching the JMU game, and what really stuck out to me is the wide receivers really struggled to create separation and catch the balls against Charlotte and Gardner-Webb. Barnett was putting the ball where it needed to be. He was working through his progressions 9 times out of 10 correctly through the first 2 weeks, but his receivers, it seemed like, were failing him. And now the receivers are creating that separation. His receivers are making the catches. His tight ends are coming up big. Taylor Thompson had a career day. And there's just everything seems to be firing on all cylinders now. And Dean Kennedy has, it seems like, installed his full playbook, because there were formations that I've never seen on a football field before. They were doing trips to the far side of the field, but it wasn't like your traditional trips. It was a little stacked ladder, it looked like, almost, and that kind of freed some things up. They would run a lot of motion to the near side, and they'd almost, there was, I think, a play they faked the screen and it was a quick out to Cam Ross on the far side. I mean, he was deep in his bag of tricks. And now that everything's firing on all cylinders, now that I think everyone can be trusted to execute, and as simple as that may sound, like, this offense has taken on it's evolved.
The offense has evolved. And I'm so glad you brought up the different formations, because while I said that the sort of the passing game and the offensive scheme wasn't overly complicated, some of the formations that we lined up in were very exotic. And these were looks that we had not necessarily put on tape so far up until this point. And what's very cool about it is that if you are a defensive coach trying to game plan for the James Madison Dukes in upcoming games, I do not believe that you have a lot of tendencies that you can look towards. Now, I do also believe that a lot of that success on third down, particularly, was due to getting the tight end involved. So you already said it. Taylor Thompson had a career day. The guy caught everything that came his way, and he was wide open for much of the game. And if we go back to that third down conversion ratio, right, we were terrible at UNC Charlotte. At UNC, right, we only converted 6 out of 13. We were 3 of 12 on third down at Gardner-Webb, and then 3 of 11 against Charlotte. And then we went 9 of 10 in this game. What's very, very interesting is that while the stat line looked like we had a sort of a balanced attack, and I want to get your take on this, Jack. If you look at our stats on offense, right, we had over 500 yards total offense. It looked like it was pretty even, though, passing versus rushing. But for me as a spectator, it felt like we were a pass first, run second offense. Did it feel like that to you from your vantage point?
Oh, it did, because all of the big plays were through the passing attack. And I feel like the final stats show that we had 220 rushing yards, 286 passing yards. I think a large portion of those 220 rushing yards were Alonzo Barnett scrambles when he couldn't find a guy to pass to. So you almost want to chalk up those yards and put him in the passing category, because it was supposed to be a pass. And his wheels were fantastic. We'll probably talk more about his just duality later on, but it was a pass first, run second type of attack. And that's really interesting, because their running game was doing well. George Pettaway was firing on all cylinders. We saw Joby Mallory blow some guys up. Wayne Knight got in there, Camarion Baldwin, Tyler Purdy. The whole stable, except for Io, who's still out with an injury, was out running, and they were doing it at a fairly consistent clip at 6.5 yards per carry. And they were dominating the line of scrimmage. If this was Kurt Cignetti, and I hate to kind of keep comparing, but I think this early on in the Chesney era, it is easy to kind of look back and compare to Cignetti. He would have been running the ball 50 times if his team was averaging 6.5 yards per carry. It was really cool to see that they were passing, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And it just kept things rolling, and it allowed them to score 63.
Yeah, you're totally right. Like, if Cignetti's offense could have run the ball at 6.5 yards a clip, Elijah Surratt would still be at JMU because no one would know who the guy is, right?
Yeah.
And I also had to rewatch the game because, much to my mom's chagrin, while at my family reunion in Virginia, I had my AirPods in and I was watching the game on my phone while eating, a bunch of really bad food that has my feet swollen to this day. Like, I have way too much sodium in my body right now. And so when I got home and rewatched it, there's a couple of big takeaways that I had. Number one, Wayne Knight, right? The Knight brothers had a day. Wayne Knight ran the ball really well. I mean, the guy is small. Actually, no, he's short, but he's not small. Like, that dude is stocky. And he broke a lot of tackles. And a lot of his bigger runs, like he had two, I think, over 20-yard runs. Two of those runs, he got hit in the backfield and broke a tackle and made a play. And then his brother, Ymir Knight, had his first reception for a touchdown and then had his second reception for a touchdown. And I could not see it on my iPhone 14. Maybe I need to upgrade to the 16 Max Pro or whatever they're calling it. But on the TV, when I rewatched it today, the pass that AB3 threw to Ymir Knight on the goal line, I think it was the first touchdown of the game, or maybe the second. I can't remember. We scored so many. But the pass that he threw, first off, he threw him open, and he threw it right in like threaded the needle. And it was a great pass, maybe an even better throw from Ymir, or an even better catch by Ymir.
Yes.
I mean, were you? I was dumbfounded by that play.
If Ymir doesn't catch that might be an interception. Like that, like great pass by Barnett, and just absolute, like, he threw him open. He threw into a window that, if you're throwing that 10 times, it's probably a completion for a touchdown 4 of the times. It's dropping for an incompletion 3 of the times, and the other ones are probably going for interceptions. The dude had a cannon, just fastball, 100 miles an hour right to Ymir, and it was just really great. Ymir Knight, it was just a day for the Knight brothers, like you said.
Yeah,
Ymir seemed to be open all the time out of the slot.
Ymir is looking to me like Chris Thornton. Like, and I think maybe the way we use Chris Thornton before he had to become wide receiver 2, after that other kid, Antoine Wells, went into the portal and went to South Carolina, right? I think Chris Thornton was more of a slot receiver, and he was always open. I see Ymir Knight as that type of player. And what really gets me excited about Ymir is that he also seems to be a very good return guy. So, I mean, he's very confident catching the ball. He went over and ran across the field to catch a punt, which we haven't seen some of our JMU return guys do in quite some time, which, that is a big field position play. You got to go catch the ball no matter where it is. And Ymir not only seems like he's very sure-handed as a punt returner, but also has some prowess to return the ball. Now, my favorite player on the team, George Pettaway, also broke a nice run early in the game. Again, if you go back and watch that play, the guy takes the handoff and somehow he's at the second level before anyone even touches him.
He's so good.
He's so good. You know what? The only thing, I got to give GP some crap on this, bro. His touchdown celebration was so bad. Like, I was expecting so much more, especially after such a good run. But the celebration was kind of trash, my guy. We got to work on that. We got to work on that in practice. And then the other one, you talked about Joby Mallory. And we've been wanting to see this guy because, I mean, he was a good player at Portland State. And he's a big physical running back, someone that we should be able to utilize in our game plan. But he finally gets into the game. He has 2 touchdowns. The first touchdown was kind of a ho-hum sort of goal line touchdown. The second run, although it was late in the game, he breaks a tackle and does his own Amarion Hampton impersonation by breaking tackles and getting into the end zone for like a 15 or 20-yard run. So again, Joby Mallory, I think, should play into our offensive game plan going forward. What were you going to say, Jack?
No, Joby Mallory is just a monster of a human. There's no reason he should be playing running back, and I mean that in like as the biggest compliment possible. He at camp during the off season, I was there, and he was just a big guy. Then he would take handoffs and hit the line of scrimmage, and no matter where you are in Bridgeforth, you could hear the pop. I'm kind of shocked he hasn't been used more. He was the second ranked player in the FCS a year ago, or I should say the second ranked running back in the FCS a year ago, according to PFF at Portland State. He's a dog. I wonder how much of it is maybe he didn't learn the playbook maybe as quickly as Dean Kennedy and Bob Chesney has hoped. And they kind of prefer, being able to trust Tyler Purdy, who's been in the system there. And maybe we'll start seeing more of Joby Mallory as this year goes on, because I mean, based off of the few touches he got, it's just like, okay, there's no reason he should be RB5.
Yeah. Listen, you legit took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, watching him play on Saturday, I was sitting in the passenger seat of the car while my wife was driving back from Virginia to Charlotte because I made her drive. While I was watching the game and watching him do what he was doing, I legit said the only reason this guy isn't playing is because he doesn't know the playbook. Like there could be no other reason. And so I'm very excited to see what he's going to do going forward. But I'm also very excited about the fact that our offensive line not only is run blocking very well, but they gave AB3, who some people still call Zoe. I can't figure it out.
Can someone please explain that to us? We need that explained to us.
Please, somebody get in our DMs. But they gave AB3 all day to throw the ball. I mean, he got sacked 3 times, and I think all 3 of those sacks were sort of coverage sacks. They gave him all day. And what I'm more impressed with is that he literally took all the time in the world to go through his progressions, as we like to see our quarterbacks do, kept his eyes downfield even when he was scrambling, and he found receivers late in plays. And I think that's something that is going to pose, again, nightmares for opposing defenses. Now, the other thing that was really exciting this week, and Jack, I don't know if you saw our boy Tyler Purdy was honored with not only a game ball from last week in the win against UNC, but he also got a full scholarship. Did you see that?
Yeah, that's awesome. I love when they do that.
That was awesome, man. And I got to say, like, as someone who was a walk-on, who didn't earn a full scholarship until my junior year at JMU. I graduated with student loans. And after my first year in the NFL, I wrote a check to Sally Mae and I said, don't ever call me again. Right. but to see this guy who obviously is a hard worker, he earned a scholarship at Holy Cross, comes to JMU as a walk-on with no money. And then after a couple of games earns a scholarship. I thought that was fantastic. Now going back to the field for a second, a couple of things that we still saw in this game, right? We still went for 2 after the second touchdown.
A muddle huddle too.
Another muddle huddle. And I couldn't quite see it because it looked like the broadcast sort of caught it late. So I didn't really see the play, but it looked like I don't know who even got the ball, but it looked like it was Taylor Thompson, I guess, who scored.
I think it was a direct snap coming out of the muddle huddle to Taylor Thompson, who just took it as like a QB draw-esque play.
Yeah.
I think.
Now, again, I said last week that, a nightmare for defenses is that, a team puts a muddle huddle or some crap play on film and then they never run it again. But this is an even bigger nightmare because we've showed that we're going to do that almost every single game now. Like 2 consecutive games in a row, we've done it and we've been successful. Now, not only do you have to spend a little time on it, you actually have to spend valuable time on it in your offensive game plan or defensive game plan and prepare for it.
And it's vastly different, the 2 plays they ran out of it. A QB draw-esque play that goes right behind the center, and then a rollout with the kicker throw to long snapper, because that makes sense.
Yeah, insane. I think the most impressive thing about this offense, though, because we could talk about it all day. I mean, listen, we scored 63 points. The cool thing, though, is all touchdowns. All right? All touchdowns, no field goals. And I think as long as this team has that sort of success rate getting into the end zone, we're going to be very hard to beat because guess what? It seems like our defense is pretty stingy. And I'm going to say that last week against Chapel Hill in that 50 points, and I think I said it on last week's episode, that's sort of a throwaway game. Like, you don't have to win the Kentucky Derby by, a mile. You just got to win it by a nose. And so I think last week's defense against Chapel Hill, we can chalk that up a little bit to, hey, we'll give you that because we're still going to win by 20 or 30 points. But this week, if we look at the defense, we gave up only one touchdown, which going into the Chapel Hill game, we had only given up one touchdown for the entire season. And we go back to that identity. That identity is takeaways. We had 3 more takeaways, right? Right now, JMU leads the nation in turnover margin. And I'm telling you, Jack Fitzpatrick, you are the EPA king. If you can go +3 in the turnover ratio, you're going to win a lot of games. So overall thoughts on the defense right now for you, Jack, and the way they performed in this game.
Thank you for opening up the floor here on the defense, because when I was watching it, I was amazed with what Lyle Hemphill was doing and how the players were executing it. There was a thing here and there, but you're going to have things here and there every game with the defense. If we're picking nits, Emmanuel Bush, please make that sack. You ran full speed into the quarterback, and somehow, I know he's probably kicking himself about that one, but overall, it was a fantastic defensive game plan. It was executed well. It was called well. That pick 6 from Eric O'Neill, to kind of get into the weeds a little bit with it. Wow. I mean, they put 4 guys, and then they bring up, I believe, Trent Hendrick on the line. So you have 5 guys on the line of scrimmage. That redshirt freshman sees that, and he's thinking, okay, I see the blitzers. I know where it's coming from. Then the ball is snapped. If you do a freeze frame right then and there, Trent Hendrick and the 4 down linemen are rushing, and Jacob Dobbs begins to rush. Redshirt freshman probably assesses that, goes, all right, I have 6 blitzers coming in. This is okay. I know where my hot read is. I'm going to go out there. Then you go like 2 more frames. All of a sudden, Trent Hendrick is bailing. Eric O'Neill is bailing, and Jacob Dobbs. So now you go from thinking it was a 6-man rush. It's a 4-man rush. You're going to your hot read, and your hot read's covered by a defensive end. Just and then pick 6, and it was just like beautiful. And so many other times they're showing blitz, and then they bail out of it at last second, or they show blitz heavy to the near side, and then they'll bail out of it, and the safety has a delayed blitz on the far side, and it's just making the redshirt freshman's head spin. And it was so cool seeing exotic blitz packages, because JMU has had, an elite defensive line where you don't necessarily need to be bringing the extra guys all that often. Oh, it was cool though to see just like almost an NFL style blitz package type of defensive setup.
Totally. I mean, Coach Hemp dialed every last one of those up almost to perfection. And the one that you're talking about with O'Neill, I mean, it's one thing to get the D end in that sort of position. It's another thing for him to actually execute the interception. Like that is not an easy catch, right? Because I mean, it was at point blank range. He catches the ball, and then I don't know if you noticed, but he's pretty damn fast. Yeah. And just to kind of go back to my guy GP for his terrible touchdown celebration. I mean, O'Neill might be my favorite celebrator on the team, because he goes in, he slides into second base, right? For his celebration. And then the rest of the team comes in and slides behind him. That was fantastic. Couldn't have done that during my time at JMU. We had the old school turf. So if you slid like that, you would not have any skin on your shin anymore. So, but love that play. Now with that, sort of those exotic looks. All right. The thing that you have to look at, and Jack, you and I texted about this prior to the game. I was actually a little worried about Simonza, their quarterback. I was actually slightly concerned about, number one, he's a California kid. He's got a little swagger. He's actually been able to execute some throws, and he actually has some weapons. I mean, he got a 6'7" tight end, and you saw last week against Chapel Hill that Nesbitt, their 6'5" tight end, we sort of struggled with him in coverage a little bit. And this guy Kozil, their 6'7" guy, he caught 9 passes. I mean, I think they targeted him 10 times. He caught 9 of them. And then he had another kid that caught 8 passes. So he has some weapons. I was a little concerned, but he only completed 62% of his passes. When coming into this game, he had completed over 70% of his passes, and we held him to only 168 yards. This defense to your point, Jack, with some of these exotic looks, some of these things that would confuse the best of them, also held their rushing attack to under 100 yards. The first time this season that our defense has held a team to under 100 yards. And then the one thing that I'm most impressed with was our ability to get pressure with our front four. Right. And again, a lot of that might have been due to some of the looks that we were given. I think they were a little confused in protection, but we got 5 sacks. Kari Mann's got 2 of them. O'Neal got another 2. And a lot of times we got there. We just didn't get Simonza on the ground. And dude, I'm going to talk that up to the fact that tackling in college football is not only bad right now, it's just impossible. Because if you think about it, especially when you got to tackle a quarterback, where do you hit the guy where you don't get a penalty, right? I mean, you got like this little tiny space. If you hit him too high, it's targeting. You hit him too low, it's a penalty. I mean, you just don't have a way to hit him. And so I'm going to chalk some of that up to that. So, but what do you think about, I guess, the pressure that our front four was able to get? And you know, a unit that we were a little concerned about, I think, coming into this year because we lost some of the dogs that we had last year.
Yeah, they played very well. And I think Hemphill, his packages and his blitzes really help with it, because if it was just, okay, you 4 go out and win each rep, I'm not sure if they necessarily could, but when you have these blitz packages, when you're showing one thing and you're doing these stunts and these weird moves, it really opens things up and it helps them get their rhythm in a game and just find that, find it. And it's been going well for him. I do want to say, I've been thinking about this after I watched the game, and I may be prisoner of the moment. I understand. I think this defense as a whole unit is better than last year's. And that may sound crazy coming off of the UNC game, but I just remember the feelings of when our front four weren't getting home and we had to rely on the secondary to make plays. And the secondary last year could get got, and they got quite a few times. The UVA game, there were other games throughout the season where the secondary was a little iffy, but the front four were so good that it really didn't matter because they were making quarterbacks throw the ball in less than a second. But this year, it feels like the secondary can step up and hold their own when the front four isn't getting time. The linebackers can help out on the rush. It just feels like a much more well-rounded unit that is just super fun to watch defensively. And they're starting to get better with their tackling. Charlotte, they were abysmal at tackling. Chapel Hill, they were not that great at tackling. But in this game, they were very, very good at tackling according to their PFF grade. There was a couple misses here and there, but I think they're starting to gel. I think they're starting to find that rhythm and understand what Hemphill is asking of them.
Yeah, that is a very interesting take. I mean, if I had to compare last year's defense with this year's defense, I think you're right. I think our secondary plays much better. I think our defenders play those intermediate routes that seem to, teams seem to be able to do at will against us last year. We cover those much better. I think where, for me as someone objectively looking at this team versus last year's team, some of the things that I see now that sort of throw me off is that we are susceptible to some 15, 20-yard runs between the tackles. And that's something that we're not accustomed to seeing. But to your point, if we're not necessarily selling out to stop the run, then that always opened us up on the back end. And now what I think we're seeing is a more balanced defense. So we're likely going to see some 5, 6, 7-yard runs here and there.
And they can catch that secondary, like Barksdale, his one-handed tip to himself crazy thing at the end of the first half when Ball State was kind of driving down the field. It looked like they were potentially going to score. And that was during a second quarter that JMU, the offense wasn't, granted the offense scored on like every drive, but Ball State had kind of slowed the momentum a little bit. And then Barksdale said, just kidding, I'm going to tip this to myself and catch it. That's a play the secondary never would have made a year ago.
Never would have made. And shout out to Barksdale, man. The guy for the second week in a row, I think, is just proving that he is one of the heartbeat of this team. And that play that he made is probably going to be one of the better interceptions that you will see in college football this year, to have the wherewithal to, number one, not interfere with the receiver, and then number two, to deflect the ball. That would have been a good play on his own, but for him to have the awareness to actually catch it, I mean, just a sick play from one of my favorite players on this team. And then our guy T Spence comes up with another pick, and you can say what you want, but that was a tip ball, and that was not an easy interception, because to your point, we had a lot of tip drill opportunities last year, and we had players that did not make that play. Our guy T Spence just has a nose for the football. Reminds me of a teammate I play with, Mike Masella, who is one of our safeties. The guy was just always around the ball, and the ball just seemed to like land in his hands. So anyway, I just believe that, as we go back to something that you and I said in the very first episode of To the House, we said that we were going to see some unsung heroes. We're going to see the emergence of players that coming into the season probably had little to no expectations to have a true tremendous impact on the performance on the team. And now we're seeing these players sort of come to the fore. Guys like Eric O'Neal, Terrence Spence, DJ Barksdale. On the offensive side, all three wide receivers, right? Dollison, Cam Ross, Yamir Knight, because all we talked about was Taji Hudson, right? Taji Hudson hasn't, I don't know if he's even caught a pass this year. And those other three guys are balling.
Just one target this season too.
Yeah, just one target. So again, we're seeing the emergence of some of these unsung heroes.
Even Alonzo Barnett. I mean, he came in. We didn't think he was going to be the starter, and all of a sudden we're talking. Is he a Heisman finalist? I mean, then you could even go to the offensive line with Joseph Simmons and Riley Robel, these like swing guys who come in for 50% of the snaps. Yeah, you were right when you were saying it's going to come down to some unsung guys.
Yeah. So, I mean, really just a really, really good performance. Before we transition over to thoughts on University of Louisiana Monroe, I did actually have a couple of questions for you, Jack. So, I mean, I just wanted to, because you guys do such a good job on the JMU Sports News podcast, asking some of these hypothetical questions. I've heard you talk about you are against expansion of the mullet of Bridgeforth Stadium. You like the fact that it's business on one side, party on the other. And, if you watch the broadcast, there was an interview with the new AD, Matt Rohn, and he talked about, possibly some plans being drawn up to potentially expand Bridgeforth. So I'm just curious, my guy, like, what are your thoughts on that? And why are you against expanding the mullet?
I guess I'm not against it. My main point with it, though, is I want to see multiple years of sellout. So I think this is year one. If we go through it next year for year two of like selling out every game, I'm all for it. I want to expand it. I just get real worried. I've heard the horror stories of, ODU, they expand a little bit and then their program and they can't make even half fill it. I heard a story. A friend of mine used to work in Louisville radio, and when Lamar Jackson was with Louisville, they had all of this hype around the program. They expanded their stadium. Then Lamar left, and Louisville hasn't really been all that relevant up until, last season, and their attendance numbers took a nosedive, and their stadium just didn't look good on TV. And for a really long time, it felt like that a large argument for why we should expand Bridgeforth was because, quote, it looks bad on the broadcast. And I thought that was a horrible reason. I do think you can expand Bridgeforth if we sell out all of our games through 2025. And then I'm okay with going through this discussion. Up to this point, I don't think we've deserved it yet.
Yeah,
as fans.
I think that is fair to an extent. The comparison with ODU is probably not a fair comparison because they started the program in a flash, right?
Yeah.
With no actual sustainable success. They had Taylor Heineken or Heineke, right? Heineken's a beer, right?
He is sponsored by Heineken.
Is he? Oh, fantastic.
I think so.
Good guy. But they had Taylor, right? And they sold out, and then they expanded probably too soon. But again, JMU, I think, has the fan base that is ready for an expansion. And expansion probably means adding 7 or 8,000 seats, but more so making a uniform sort of stadium because it doesn't look great on the broadcast. So I would be in favor of stadium expansion.
I just love the mullet, and I love that you've called it the mullet. I love that it's weird. I love that it doesn't make sense. It's kind of a little ugly. Like that's what makes college football so great, in my opinion. Granted, would it look better on TV with like the full yeah, 100% it would.
Totally.
I'm for expansion once we prove it.
All right. All right. So we'll agree to disagree. Now, the
Yes.
other question I have for you, of course, we saw that our good friends at Indiana, JMU 2.0, they are now ranked. I want to say what they're ranked. Is it in the AP poll that came out today? 22nd, I want to say.
I think so. Let me double check.
So I was going to ask you before this poll came out today, who do you think would be ranked first, Indiana or JMU? But we're both undefeated. So my now question for you is, who loses first? Will Indiana lose first, or will JMU lose a game first? What do you think, Jack?
Well, let's see. Indiana got Northwestern, Nebraska, Washington, Michigan State, Michigan. Ooh, two of their final 3 games are tough.
Brutal.
I think Indiana loses a game first.
Yeah.
I think Indiana loses October 19th at home against Nebraska.
Yeah. I think that would be a good call. I think they struggled a little bit against Maryland this week. I mean, it was a close game, and then, Elijah Surratt pulled out some heroics, and, they kind of won the game. But, looking at Indiana, it makes me sort of feel like that high school breakup. You feel a little better moving on after you get a new girlfriend, right? Like now that we're winning and we've hit our stride, we're like, oh, good for those guys. But before that, I was like, screw Indiana, right?
Yeah, it was a little rough there for a little bit.
But now we got to keep this gravy train rolling. I think, again, going back to Coach Bob Chesney, the fact that we can, I think, trust that he's going to have the team ready. He's going to help them to sort of put this in perspective. You scored 63 points against Ball State. You've beaten ACC Power 4 school, but now we've got another opponent. And every week is the most important game ever. And so we're opening our conference play, Sun Belt play now against UL Monroe, the Warhawks. And I think this is the first time we've ever played this program. I mean, am I right? I mean, I don't know that we've ever actually played UL Monroe. Is that right?
Let me quickly check. Let me click history here. I believe, yep, this is the first ever matchup against the Warhawks.
Yeah. So, I mean, the cool thing is it's going to feel like an out-of-conference game because we've never played them. They've never played us. We don't know a whole lot about them because we don't have that history on them. I think the other thing that's very interesting is that, we had a player on our offensive line, one of our offensive starters last year, transferred to ULM, Carter Miller. And so, does he look at this sort of as a revenge game? I'm playing my old team, blah, blah, blah. Or does that not even come into play? Because I honestly can't tell you why he transferred to ULM.
I don't know either. At first, I thought maybe it was to get closer to home, but he actually went further away from home. I have no clue.
Yeah, I have some guesses, but I'm going to leave that off air. I'll put it in our group chat later. But ULM, they finished the year last year 2-10.
Bad.
They were bad last year. So already they are 3-1. They have surpassed last year's win total by beating Troy this past week. And I think the biggest challenge that we're going to have as a unit is going down there and playing in that atmosphere, right? Because, we played the Charlotte game this year, and Charlotte had a nice crowd and people were fired up. It was the first game of the season, so that was easy. Gardner-Webb, we came back home, big crowd at our home stadium, season opener for us at home, right? UNC, Power 4 Stadium, people are already hyped just for the opportunity to go in and beat a UNC team. ULM, though, if we look at this team right now, they have a 28,000 seat stadium. And so far in their first 2 home games, to your point about stadium expansion, Jack Fitzpatrick, they've averaged about 12,000 fans. And that would be great if they had a 12,000 seat stadium. But the fact that over half of the stadium will be empty, and it's a 7 o'clock night game, road game in Louisiana. And I'm not quite sure how many of our JMU fans are going to travel to Monroe, Louisiana. This atmosphere will be a challenge for the Dukes. So your thoughts on JMU just going down there and being able to sort of overcome what will likely be maybe not so hostile environment, maybe just a dead environment.
It'll be a dead environment. It's Monroe, Louisiana, which is not the easiest place to get to. I remember when they were playing Troy last year, we talked with a Troy podcast, and they said it's hard to get to Troy, Alabama when you wake up in Troy, Alabama. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing. It's hard to get to Monroe, Louisiana when you wake up there, and that adds something to it. This is, we said it last week, and we may be saying it every week now. This is a trap game, and this just feels trappy. A new coach, a sleepy atmosphere, a team that wants to prove themselves. They know how to handle this environment. JMU doesn't. At least this team has not done it, so they don't know yet. It'll be an interesting to see how a bunch of 18 to, I guess Dylan Morris now is like what, 24, 25, a bunch of kids handle this type of game.
Yeah. And again, I think that's where it comes back to our trust and belief in Coach Bob Chesney and this staff. Can they get the guys ready? No matter what that outside noise says, let's go out and play our game. Now, I think to your point, ULM, we're not quite sure what they are. I feel a lot like the Ball State game. In fact, going into that game, I didn't know what Ball State was. I mean, they played a couple of close games. They got blown out by a top 10 team. Well, the same has sort of been the case for this ULM team. I mean, they beat a FCS Jackson State team. That game was competitive going into the third quarter, again, against an FCS team. They pulled it out 30-14. Then they blew out UAB, which I think seems to be down this year. Their only win, UAB's only win, is against an FCS team, right? And then they got blown out by Texas. And I watched the highlights of the Texas game, the full highlights of that game. I mean, they got utterly dominated. I think Texas put 50 on them. ULM only scored 3 points. And then last week they beat a Troy team, which it looks like they are also down. They beat that team 13-9. Troy's starting quarterback went out in the second quarter, so there were not a whole lot of points scored in that game. And if JMU continues their recent trend of scoring 60 or more points, then I think ULM's got to put up way more points than 13 to be able to hang with us. So what are your thoughts, I guess, on how they've performed over the first several games of the season?
Well, if you were an over better on the ULM win total coming into this season, it has already cashed, because coming into the year, there was really low expectations. Their win total was set at 2.5 coming into this season. Already you've hit that. But ULM, good defense. Maybe one of the worst offenses in the nation. They don't really do anything well offensively. That should be a cakewalk for JMU's defense. Offensively, it's kind of a good on good type of situation. ULM's best part of their defense is slowing down passing attacks. This season, they've allowed negative 0.19 EPA per pass. So for every pass play that ULM has had to defend against, you can look up to the scoreboard and you can watch negative 0.19 points come off of the board each and every time, which is 34th in the nation. JMU's offense has a 0.10 EPA per pass, which is 49th in the nation. So that's kind of a good on good matchup. And if JMU can move the ball, if they can hit their deep shots, the 3 or 4 or 5 deep shots that Dean Kennedy has in his bag, if they hit 1 or 2 of those, I don't see ULM having enough offense to overcome that.
Yeah. By the way, I love that you came through with the EPA stats. That's my guy, meeting expectations. Now, I got to say, I am so confused as to why this ULM offense is so bad. Like, I can't figure it out. I mean, General Booty, who is their quarterback,
What a name.
I mean, top 10 names in college football. But General Booty, he seems like a very capable signal caller, right? I mean, he transferred from Oklahoma, I think. And he goes there to play. And I thought that would be a huge boon to this program. Now, maybe it has translated that way because they've already exceeded their win total from last year, but they are not very productive at all. I mean, I think he only has 241 yards passing and 1 touchdown through 4 games. And he seems like a pretty smart quarterback. He makes pretty good decisions. He's got a good arm. And it's interesting. They run sort of a zone read offensive scheme as well. And I've seen where he has kept the ball on that zone read and actually broken off some pretty good runs. And so it has all the recipes of being a pretty good offense. I'm just very, very confused as to why they are so bad. Conversely, go ahead. Tell me.
No, they are just very bad. I don't understand it either. It makes they're not good at anything, and it's very rare you see an offense that's bad at everything to the extent that they are.
Yeah, they're not terrible on the run. I mean, their running back Hardy, I think, is a pretty good running back. I mean, the guy has pretty good vision. He's a very patient runner. He presses the line of scrimmage before he breaks either, cuts it back or cuts it out, bounces it out. And so they seem like a pretty good running offense. I feel like he's had some success, and they also seem to be very, very committed to the run. But if you go back and watch the Jackson State University game that they played, I think the first game of the season, Jackson State, again, an FCS program, on both sides of the ball was able to really sort of control the line of scrimmage. If not control, let's call it a tie. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, ULM gave up. I think they are susceptible to a lot of those chunk plays, just like, our previous 4 opponents have been. And so, I think if you look at some of the runs and the passes that Jackson State had against them, I mean, they had some really nice runs and they had some really nice long passing plays downfield. And I think we should be able to have a day against this defense, especially considering they run a more sort of traditional 3-4 defense with cover 2 behind it. There's going to be an extra defender back there that AB3 is going to have to negotiate. But if you looked at what Ball State did this past week, I mean, they ran sort of that same set a lot, and we had a lot of success against it. So it's not something that AB3 has not seen, but maybe something that we haven't seen is an edge rusher like this kid Pullen that they have, who is in the backfield a lot for ULM. He has 3.5 sacks coming into this game. I would not be surprised if our running backs have to sort of stay in and help our offensive tackles, sort of help with this guy, or at least chunk him on their way out into their passing routes. So have you looked at their defense, and any thoughts on this kid Pullen, who's a really good edge rusher who's probably going to wreak some havoc on Saturday?
He'll have his work cut out for him against one of the top offensive lines in the nation. JMU's ranked 7th in the nation in pass blocking per PFF, 6th in the nation in run blocking per PFF. They should be able to shut down Billy Pullen. If they're unable to, I'm not going to say hit the panic button or anything. Good for Billy Pullen if he's able to go off. But JMU's offensive line has shown that they're capable of slowing down edge defenders. And whether it's Simmons, whether it's McMurtry, whether it's Ramil, Robel, whoever is matched up against him with whatever platoon they bring in, I think should be able to slow him down in this game.
Yeah, he's a solid kid, though. I hope you are absolutely right. What's interesting, I think, is that this should be really, not a close football game. Like, I don't know if the line has come out on this game yet, but I would not be surprised if we're not favored by 3 touchdowns. But that doesn't matter. What matters is what actually happens on the field. And so hopefully the guys go out and they're actually ready to play. So, Jack, any final thoughts on ULM and this game coming up? I guess this week we actually get to test Bennett's theory about AB3 being sort of a daytime game quarterback, because unfortunately this is a 7 p.m. kickoff. Now it's in another time zone, so I don't know if that matters.
That may impact some things. Yeah,
that may impact, right? So we get to test the theory. But any final thoughts on ULM before we move to what you're talking about, Willis?
This also has the potential to be just a weird game in general. I was just crunching the numbers. They averaged 38 rushes per game and just 17 passes per game.
Yeah.
Like, they want to control the time of possession, lean on their defense. I mean, shout out, I think Brian Vincent is his name. Shout out Brian Vincent, their first year head coach, understanding that they probably have the talent disadvantage in most of these games. General Booty has kind of been, booty with some of these games. He's had his moments, but I don't know if he got bent. You may have said this. I don't know if he got benched or injured last game.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you knew. I mean, I did a lot of research because he left that game and they brought in another kid. And I'm going to guess he got benched because I saw nothing about injury.
Yeah, I've seen that. No one covers ULM football apparently because there are no news articles around this team. If he was benched, it looks like Aiden Armenta, a redshirt freshman, came in for him. He went 4 for 6, 108 yards in that Troy game. Also ran the ball for 10 yards. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see. It just has the capability. If ULM gets into the game script they want, this could be one of the most maddening games we've watched as JMU fans in quite some time. Will ULM do that? I think it's highly unlikely, but in the rare case that they can, buckle up. It'll be fun.
Yeah, I mean, listen, they're committed to the run. They want to control the ball and keep our offense on the sideline. And, to your point, the defense has to find a way to stop that running back because their passing game is not great and get off the field. All right, Jack, you know what time it is. It's time for What You Talking About, Willis.
What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
All right, Jack. All right, so I had to talk about this. I don't know if you saw the end of the Virginia Tech Miami game. Yeah. So I honestly, I see the end of this game. I see this Hail Mary. I see it, what seems to be an actual catch. It's ruled a catch and a touchdown on the field. And then they go into the tent, they come back and they overturn the call. Now, here's where I get to the What You Talking About, Willis. And my What You Talking About, Willis, is the entire ACC, because they released a statement that said during the review process of the last play of the Virginia Tech at Miami game, it was determined that the loose ball was touched by a Miami player while he was out of bounds, which makes it an incomplete pass and immediately ends the play. ACC, what you talking about, Willis? How on earth did you see that, number one? And the fact that it was called a touchdown on the field means that you needed irrefutable, indisputable evidence. And I did not see any irrefutable, indisputable evidence, nor did I see a Miami player's back touch out of bounds, which effectively ended the play. Jack, help me out. Am I crazy here?
You can't overturn whatever was called on the field or that play. If it was an incomplete pass, it was an incomplete pass. If it was a touchdown, you can't overturn it. You couldn't. What were you looking at? Ooh, okay, this might be a good time for me to throw one of my theories at you.
Go for it.
I believe referees should not exist in sport. I believe all sports should be self-officiated because referees are horrible and ruining the product.
Yeah, that's probably taking it too far because you know what? I grew up playing basketball and I saw what would happen with some of the self-officiating. Let's just put it that way.
You're not wrong.
If you want to see what happens with self-officiating, go watch a movie called White Man Can't Jump, and you will absolutely see what happens when people are left to their own devices. But to your point, I don't believe that you could overturn whatever was called on the field. So had they called it incomplete, there was probably not indisputable evidence to overturn that call. But the fact that they called it a touchdown on the field and that garbage statement, the Miami defender's back was out of bounds, which effectively ended the play. What you talking about, Willis? I mean, that's insane. And we're defending, and I just want to make sure that this is on wax. We're defending Virginia Tech. I mean, we're not necessarily in love with Virginia Tech. So the fact that, they got sort of cheated out of that game kind of makes me a little sick. Right. All right, Jack. It's getting a little late in the night, man. It's time for us to take it to the house. And Jack, at the risk of jinxing our beloved Dukes and having our fan base collectively yell playoffs in their best Jim Mora voice, I want to talk about this year's 12-team college football playoff. Because as the 2024 season heats up and the G5 playoff spot is coming more into focus, we are starting to hear chirps, which will undoubtedly become full-on temper tantrums very soon, about how the G5 does not deserve a spot with the quote-unquote elite programs in the country. Now, possibly the biggest critic of the G5's inclusion in the CFP is Paul Feinbaum, a guy who has never played a down of football in his life and looks like he might struggle to even compete in his senior community's pickleball tournament. No, by the way, Jack, no shade to anyone who's never played football. Now, earlier this year on a radio show in Alabama, Feinbaum said, "I'm just sick and tired of it." Interesting choice of words, right? He's just, of all the things you could be sick and tired of, he's just sick and tired of G5 teams, right? But he went on to say, "I don't want to watch those games. I want to see the best." My question for Mr. Feinbaum and those that agree with him is, who determines who is the best? Should it be your opinion, the name on the jersey, the school endowment, the NIL budget, the conference affiliation, the TV deal? Or should it be the play on the field? What's interesting about these arguments is that the G5 team is always compared to the top team in the nation when that logic is never applied to the fringe P4 programs. Here's how that argument usually goes, Jack. Georgia would crush JMU. Now, I'm not sure if you've been paying attention, but Georgia crushed Clemson. Not hypothetically, but in real life, a Clemson team that still has a realistic shot of securing a spot in this year's playoff. That logic is always applied to the G5 school, but never to the fringe P4 schools that will squeak into the playoff picture at maybe the 10th or the 11th spot. The sad reality is that although the playoff has been expanded to 12 teams, there's really only 4 teams max that would realistically be head and shoulders above everyone else, G5 or P4. So why would we not include a G5 program over some 12-seed P4 program that also doesn't have a quote-unquote realistic shot at winning the championship? The real problem is that these G5 playoff haters operate on feeling and not facts. So here are the facts. Since 2005, G5 programs are 8-8 against power conference opponents in either BCS or New Year's 6 bowl games. 8-8. Those would be playoff games this year. During the CFP era, G5 teams are 4-6. And the only real lopsided loss was last year's matchup with perennial phony Liberty, who got boat raced by Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl. You know, I had to get a Liberty shot. The idea that these teams are more talented because the school has more resources is blatantly false and has been disproved by the likes of, to name a few, App State over Michigan and Texas A&M, JMU over number 13 Virginia Tech in 2010, who, by the way, won the ACC championship that year over Florida State. And in case you don't remember, we were an FCS school then. And then this year, Northern Illinois over the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, who is still in the top 15 and will likely be included in the playoff if they win out. Yes, they lost to MAC Conference Northern Illinois that has since lost to Buffalo and a bad NC State team. Feinbaum blames the media's obsession with the quote-unquote underdog story, but this underdog narrative has been embraced by March Madness, where everyone has a chance to win, and the Cinderella each year brings the actual excitement to the tournament. But there's something very un-American about this G5 doesn't belong in the playoffs take. Because what is America if not an underdog story? Because in the Revolutionary War, Great Britain was Alabama. Bigger name, better resources, and seemingly unstoppable. But America was a little team like James Madison, proud and true. And unfortunately, if it were up to the likes of Paul Feinbaum, we'd still be getting taxed without representation. That's it, JMU Nation. We are in the house. Thank you for tuning in this week and each and every week to the House. Jack, why don't you tell the people where they can find us and everything there is to know about the JMU Sports News Network?
Yeah, you can follow along at JMU to the House, Twitter, Instagram, and you can keep it locked to everything happening with To the House and the JMU Sports News Network with video clips, long form videos, everything like that. Over on YouTube, just type in JMU Sports News in the search bar, or if you're watching this on YouTube, just hit the subscribe button right below so you never miss anything, and you can keep it locked on the JMU Sports News Network wherever you find podcasts. That includes Apple Podcasts and Spotify, our top 2 listening sources. So keep it locked, follow along, subscribe, like, rate, do all of those fun things that help us keep it going.
Yes, sir. And by the way, let's go to Louisiana, Monroe, wherever the heck that is, and let's go get a win. Let's keep this train rolling. All right, let's take it to the house. Go Dukes.
To the House is part of the JMU Sports News Network. New episodes of To the House with JMU Hall of Famer Delvin Joyce drop every Monday, and episodes of the JMU Sports News podcast drop in the middle of every week. Subscribe to the JMU Sports News Network wherever you find your podcast and never miss an episode. You can watch every episode of To the House on the JMU Sports News YouTube. Stay updated on social at JMU Sports News and at JMU To the House, and at our website, jmusportsnews.com.